I rescued the amnesiac heir and he refused to let me go. Adrian looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. "Who are you?" he asked. For several seconds I could not breathe. I had escaped from a burning warehouse with blood running down my face, crossed half the city to get home, and endured every step because I believed Adrian would be waiting for me. Yet the man who had promised to protect me was standing beside Noah Dawson, the beloved hero of the original story, and there was no recognition in his eyes. Noah leaned against him and smiled. "Adrian has recovered his memory," he said. "I am the person he has been searching for. You should leave before I call the police." Something inside me broke. Adrian had remembered his entire life, but he had forgotten only me. I swallowed my tears, walked past them, and packed 2 sets of clothes. Then I clipped a leash onto Sunny and left without looking back. The city lights were beautiful that night, but I had never felt more alone. I thought I had finally escaped the fate that killed me in my first life. I thought I had found a man who would choose me. I was wrong. Before we return to the beginning, please subscribe to BL Storytime, and stay with Ethan and Adrian until the end of their second chance at love. The rain was falling so hard that the narrow streets of District X looked like rivers. I wore a cheap yellow raincoat and held the leash of my dog Sunny, who usually considered rainy walks a personal insult. That night he suddenly stopped, sniffed the air, and dragged me into a dark alley. My name was Ethan Bennett, and I had already died once. I thought he needed to relieve himself, so I praised him for being a civilized dog. Then I saw the man lying in a pool of rainwater and blood. Every sensible thought told me to walk away. I had already died once because I became involved with powerful people. I had no wish to repeat the experience. Yet the stranger was still breathing, and Sunny pushed his nose against the back of my knee as if ordering me to help. I stood beneath the weak light at the entrance of the alley and argued with myself. Leaving would be easy. The rain would erase my footprints, and no one had seen me enter. I could return to my apartment, dry Sunny, make noodles, and pretend the night had been ordinary. That was the choice a clever person would make. My feet refused to move. The man had fallen with one arm beneath him and the other stretched across the water. Blood flowed from beneath his coat and disappeared into the gutter. His face was pale, his lips had almost no color, and rain collected on his lashes. He did not look like a powerful heir or a dangerous soldier. He looked like someone the world had thrown away. I knew that feeling too well. Sunny pushed me again, then ran to the man and barked once. I told him not to touch the blood. Sunny ignored me and placed one paw near the stranger's shoulder. He looked back with an expression that said he had already made the decision for both of us. I checked the alley and saw no cameras, open windows, or moving shadows. Then I knelt in the water and placed 2 fingers against the man's neck. His pulse was weak but present. When I pressed a hand near the wound in his abdomen, his body reacted with a faint tremor. I told him that he was lucky my dog had better morals than I did. He did not answer. The old mark on his wrist made the rain disappear from my awareness. In the dark basement of my first life, a man had once passed medicine through a gap in the door. I had seen only his hand and that mark. Later, during the final days before the operation, the same man had whispered that I should not surrender. He tried to find a path out for me, but the Dawson family moved too quickly. I never learned his name. I only remembered that someone had looked at me and seen a human being. Now the owner of that hand lay at my feet. I removed my raincoat, pressed it around his wound, and tried to wake him. There was no response. Calling an ambulance would create records, police questions, and attention. If he had enemies, a hospital might lead them directly to him. I hated making such a decision without his consent, but I chose the only place I could control. I told Sunny to lead the way home. Lifting the stranger was a battle. His height made every position awkward, and his weight nearly pulled me into the water. I managed to place one arm across my shoulders and drag him several steps before my knees began shaking. Sunny ran ahead, returned, and barked encouragement as if noise could reduce the weight. The walk that normally took 10 minutes lasted almost an hour. I stopped beneath every covered doorway to breathe. Each time the man shifted, pain seemed to tear through my back. I complained to him continuously. I told him that anyone who looked so lean had no right to weigh as much as a stone statue. I told him he owed me several dinners and perhaps a new spine. He remained unconscious and avoided responsibility. At the apartment stairs, I seriously considered leaving him on the ground floor. Then I imagined Aunt Linda finding a bloody stranger in the morning and abandoned that idea. I climbed one step at a time. Sonny stood above us and whined whenever I paused. When we reached the second floor, I pushed the door open with my shoulder and lowered the man onto the rug. For a full minute, I lay beside him and stared at the ceiling. Sonny licked my ear. I told him that if he ever found another giant in an alley, he could rescue that person alone. The wound could not wait. I removed the soaked coat and shirt, cleaned the skin, and discovered a deep cut across the abdomen. There were also injuries on both hands and old scars across his chest and arms. None of them resembled the marks of an ordinary businessman. Sonny became my assistant. When I asked for light, he pulled the lamp cord with his teeth. When I asked for the medical box, he dragged it from beneath the cabinet. He even pulled the edge of the rug away from the spreading blood. I praised him until his tail struck the floor like a drum. My hands remembered more than I wanted them to remember. In my first life, I had cleaned wounds at the hospital and learned how to stop bleeding while doctors were busy. I pressed gauze into the injury and wrapped the man's abdomen, but the bandage turned red too quickly. Kyle was my only choice. I told Sonny to guard the man and ran into the storm. The clinic stood at the end of the next street, its front lights already dark. I knocked until my knuckles hurt. When Kyle finally opened the door, his hair pointed in every direction and one side of his face carried the mark of his pillow. He looked at my empty hands and asked what animal I had found this time. I told him that the animal was a man and probably weighed more than both of us together. Kyle closed his eyes as if asking the universe for patience. Then he took his medical bag and followed me. The moment he saw the stranger, sleep vanished from his expression. He examined the wound, checked the pulse, and ordered me to boil water. I moved between the kitchen and bedroom while he worked. Sonny sat outside the door, ears raised, refusing to leave. Kyle cleaned the injury and placed careful stitches. He said the blade had missed the most dangerous organs by a narrow distance. The man had lost too much blood but possessed a frighteningly strong body. Rest, food, and careful observation would probably keep him alive. Probably was not a comforting word. Kyle told me to watch for fever, confusion, bleeding, or difficulty breathing. I memorized every instruction and wrote them on the back of an old shopping receipt. He gave me medicine and looked around the apartment. There was one narrow bed, one sofa, one dog cushion, and no space for secrets. Kyle asked whether I understood that helping this man could bring danger. I said yes. He asked whether I would send the man away after he recovered. I said yes again. Kyle looked at my face and said he did not believe either answer. After he left, I removed the wet clothes from the stranger and searched for something clean. The only set large enough was a bright pair of pajamas printed with smiling tiger faces. They had been a supermarket gift and had remained unused because even I considered them too childish. I apologized to the unconscious man and dressed him in them. The result was unforgettable. His face belonged to a ruthless executive, his body belonged to a soldier, and his pajamas belonged to a child attending a festival. I covered him with a blanket before I left. My stomach reminded me that I had skipped dinner. I sat near the window with a bowl of noodles while Sonny received beef and apple. The difference between our meals reflected his position in the household. He had rescued both the stranger and my conscience, so he deserved better food. Rain struck the glass. The sound pulled me backward through time. The Dawson estate had also been surrounded by rain on the night of my first death. They called me to the medical wing and said Noah had become critically ill. Damian Dawson held my shoulder and told me that family members sacrificed for one another. His wife cried with perfect beauty while avoiding my eyes. I understood only after the medicine entered my body and my limbs stopped obeying me. They removed my clothes, placed marks across my chest, and discussed my organs as if I were not awake. I tried to call for help. My voice would not rise above a whisper. Noah entered before the operation and thanked me for saving him. His smile was gentle. He knew. Sonny escaped from the courtyard and followed my scent. He attacked the people holding me and reached the operating room door before a guard struck him. His final cry remained inside my memory even after death. The next thing I knew, I was 16 again, waking before the fire that had changed everything. I did not wait for explanations. I took cash, medicine, and Sonny, then escaped through the service gate. The fire covered our disappearance. I changed towns several times, cut my hair, learned to use contact lenses, and avoided every official record I could. For 6 years, I built a life from small things. A rented room, a second-hand computer, a growing streaming account, a friendship with Kyle, and a dog who slept beside my bed. I had no family name worth protecting, but I had freedom. The stranger in my bed threatened that freedom simply by existing. Near midnight, I heard him move. His skin had become hot, and the thermometer showed a dangerous fever. I prepared warm water and wiped his face, neck, chest, and arms. His muscles remained tense even while unconscious, as if his body had forgotten how to rest. I spoke to Sonny because silence made me nervous. I wondered whether our guest was another unfortunate character caught inside the logic of the novel. Perhaps he was a villain betrayed by his family. Perhaps he was a bodyguard who knew too much. Perhaps he had made terrible choices and now received the consequences. Sonny blinked twice and stared at my eyes. I touched my face and realized I had removed my contact lenses before bed. My left eye reflected amber in the mirror, while the right showed green. Those colors had appeared in the photographs used by the Dawson family to search for me. I put the lenses back immediately. Then I thanked Sonny and promised him another piece of beef in the morning. The fever began to fall before dawn. I sat beside the bed with a wet cloth in my hand and fell asleep against the wall. In my dream, I returned to the operating table. A light burned above me. Voices discussed the value of my heart. I heard Sonny crying beyond the door. Then a hand with an old mark reached through the darkness and pulled me away. I woke with sweat covering my back. Sonny climbed onto my lap and licked my chin. I held him until the room became real again. 6 years had passed. I was stronger now. The Dawsons could not guide me toward death with soft voices and false affection. I repeated that truth until I believed it. At sunrise, I prepared beef pancakes for Sonny and myself. The smell filled the apartment. I carried a thermometer into the bedroom and opened the curtain. The stranger was watching me. His eyes were clear, cold, and completely alert. The weakness of the previous night seemed impossible. I stopped with one hand on the curtain. Sonny stopped beside me. For several long seconds, the three of us formed a silent triangle. I smiled first because fear had never improved a situation. I told him that he had been injured, that this was my home, and that I had carried him from the alley. I promised that no one here would harm him. The hostility in his eyes shifted into confusion. Then his lashes lowered. I worried that he had lost consciousness again. I approached slowly and raised a hand toward his nose. His fingers closed around my wrist before I touched him. Pain traveled up my arm. His grip was controlled but powerful. I saw how easily he could break the bone if he chose. I repeated that I was his rescuer. Then I placed my free hand over his and said that I was a genuinely good person. The words sounded foolish, but they were all I had. His gaze moved across my face. It remained on my eyes long enough to make me grateful for the lenses. Finally, he released me. I backed out of the room with what remained of my dignity. The moment the door closed, Sonny and I ran into the kitchen. I pressed both hands against my chest and whispered that the man was terrifying. Then I remembered the scars covering his body, the blade wound, and the instinctive fear in his movements. I knew what it meant to expect pain from every approaching hand. My fear softened into sympathy. I told Sonny that we would keep the stranger until the wound closed. After that, we would help him find a safe place. Sonny rested his chin on my knee, which I accepted as reluctant agreement. I went to the market wearing a hat, mask, and glasses. The sellers knew me well and immediately asked why I needed liver, fish, vegetables, and so much rice. I said I was feeding a recovering friend. Several women offered advice at the same time. By the time I escaped, I carried extra ginger, spinach, carrots, and enough instructions to operate a small hospital. I washed the liver with starch water, sliced it thin, and marinated it with ginger. I cooked the rice until it became soft, then added fish, vegetables, liver, and beaten egg. The fragrance moved through every room. When I entered the bedroom with a tray, the stranger was awake again. His eyes followed the bowl. I told him the porridge had just left the stove and required careful blowing before eating. His temperature had returned to normal. I offered to help him to the bathroom. He looked down at the tiger pajamas, and his expression became darker than the storm clouds outside. I explained that they were new, free, and unfortunately the only thing that fit. He continued looking at me. I added that the tigers were cheerful. That information did not help. The journey to the bathroom required patience. I supported most of his weight and instructed him not to tear the stitches. Inside the narrow room, he stopped and looked at his bandaged hands. I found a sleep mask, placed it over my own eyes, and offered assistance. He remained silent. I announced that silence meant agreement and promised not to look. When we returned to the bed, both of us avoided eye contact. I fed him the porridge 1 spoon at a time. He accepted the first bite with suspicion, then ate the entire bowl. The speed with which he finished was the greatest compliment my cooking had ever received. I asked his name. He pressed his fingers against his temple. He could not remember. He could not recall a home, a family, or the people who injured him. Only one thought remained. He had to find someone. The effort to remember brought visible pain. I rubbed his back and told him that surviving came first. The unknown person could wait until he could stand without falling. For several hours I called him Mr. King because I misunderstood one of his broken answers. Each time I used the name, his face became colder. Eventually he managed to explain that he had said forgotten, not a surname. I apologized and suggested choosing a temporary name. Sonny brought a small stool, and I sat with my chin in my hands as if naming a child. The man was silent, deep, and heavy enough to break my back. I chose Ash because it sounded calm and strong. He asked why. I said it matched his quiet nature. Sonny gave me a knowing look because he remembered my complaints about the weight. Ash accepted the name. In the afternoon I visited Kyle and told him our guest had lost his memory. Kyle advised me again to send the man away. I used my most innocent expression and explained that Ash was an old acquaintance. That was not entirely a lie. Kyle said my face became especially dishonest whenever I tried to look innocent. Then he reminded me of the rare condition of my body. A small number of men in this world could carry children, and medical tests had confirmed that I belonged to that group. Kyle warned me that if I ever became intimate with anyone, protection was essential. I nearly choked and said Ash was a patient, nothing more. Kyle told me that patients did not usually receive handmade meals, new clothes, and names from their caregivers. I escaped before he could continue. On the way home, I thought about the strange biology of this world. It explained part of my abandoned childhood. Perhaps one parent had never known he could carry a child, while the other never knew a pregnancy existed. The original novel enjoyed suffering too much for any simple explanation. Whatever the truth, I would not repeat the mistakes of careless adults. I would protect my body, my future, and the quiet life I had built. When I opened the apartment door, I found Ash and Sonny staring at each other across the living room. Neither moved. The tension resembled a negotiation between hostile nations. I pulled Sonny aside and praised him as the most obedient dog in the world. His tail began moving despite his attempt to remain serious. Ash watched the performance without expression. I checked his stitches and found that he had moved from the bed to the sofa alone. I scolded him for risking the wound. As I lifted the edge of his shirt, he raised my chin and studied my face again. I asked whether something was stuck to my skin. He asked my name. I told him Ethan Bennett. He repeated Ethan slowly, as if placing the sound somewhere safe. I released a breath I had not realized I was holding and asked whether I could shave him. The dark growth along his jaw made him look even more dangerous. He agreed. I returned from the store with clothes, personal items, and the most expensive electric razor on the shelf. My savings could support another person for a while, but I still felt pain when I looked at the receipt. I washed the new clothes and prepared the razor. Ash asked whether I had ever used one. I admitted that I had almost no facial hair and had only read the instructions. His eyes became cautious. I covered his chin with foam and moved the razor with painful concentration. He asked whether I feared him. The question startled me so badly that the razor almost slipped. I ordered him not to speak while I held a machine near his face. When the work was finished, I wiped away the foam and stared. Without the rough shadow and dried blood, he looked even more remarkable. Strong brows, a straight nose, pale lips, and a jaw that could have belonged to a statue. His cold expression only increased the effect. I praised my own skill and offered to wash his hair. He asked why I treated everyone so well. The true answer involved death, rebirth, abasement, and a hand marked by an old scar. I could not tell that story without sounding insane. I needed a simple answer. I said he was exactly my type. Sonny released a quiet sound that resembled laughter. My face burned. Ash stared as if he had encountered a language he did not understand. I repeated that he was handsome and that I liked his appearance. The explanation worked. His body relaxed, and the invisible wall around him lowered. I washed his hair in the bathroom. My fingers moved across his scalp while water flowed into the basin. I asked whether he remembered the person he needed to find. Was the person tall, short, thin, or broad? Was the person family, a friend, or a lover? Ash remembered nothing. The emptiness frustrated him, so I changed the subject and told him that my food would improve his brain. After washing and drying his hair, I helped him change into black clothes. The simple outfit suited him so perfectly that I called him a moving display model. He looked relieved to escape the tiger pajamas. Then I took him to Kyle's clinic after dark. Kyle was resting in his chair when the bell rang. He looked at me, looked at Ash, and fell to the floor. I helped him stand. Kyle immediately pulled me behind him, then seemed to realize that using me as protection made no sense. He locked the clinic door and dragged me into a treatment room. He asked where I had found this particular man. I told him about the Northern Square. Kyle said he had met Ash twice during military service and had never forgotten the experience. He did not know the family name, but he knew Ash was connected to people with power. Men around him had moved like trained soldiers, and danger had followed him like a shadow. Kyle begged me to send him away after the examination. I asked whether he knew any relative or friend. Kyle did not. He had left military service soon after their last meeting. All he remembered was that Ash had been injured, furious, and impossible to approach. I felt sympathy instead of fear. A man raised among powerful enemies might never have experienced ordinary care. It explained why Ash watched every door and questioned every kindness. Kyle examined his head and wounds. He found no serious brain damage. Memory could return suddenly or remain absent for months. Rest and familiar contact were the only treatments available. During the examination, Kyle touched my shoulder while explaining something. Ash caught his wrist with enough force to make Kyle curse. I ordered Ash to release him and apologize. To the surprise of both of us, Ash obeyed. Kyle stared at the man who frightened military officers and then stared at me. He asked whether I had trained him while no one was watching. I said good manners were free. Kyle changed the bandages and criticized my earlier wrapping. I admitted that panic had caused me to wrap fingers that were not injured. Kyle said I had prepared Ash like a festival package. We left with medicine and a warning to return if the headaches worsened. The rain had stopped. Night wind moved through the wet trees, and insects called from the darkness. I stepped through puddles while Ash avoided them with quiet precision. I suggested frightening him to restore his memory. He rejected the idea. I suggested striking his head so the missing memories might return. He looked at me until I promised never to perform medical experiments. At home, Aunt Linda waited to collect rent. She asked about the bandages and whether I had rescued another animal. I said I had found an injured cat that escaped after treatment. Her gaze moved to the tall man behind me. I introduced him as my older brother visiting for a few days. Ash did not correct me. Aunt Linda accepted the answer because she was too intimidated to ask another question. That night, I prepared noodles with chicken broth. Ash ate quietly while I planned my streaming schedule. I told him I worked late and never used a camera. He could sleep without worrying that anyone would recognize him. The moment the broadcast began, familiar names filled the chat. I greeted everyone, accepted game orders, and refused another request to reveal my face. Then Ash entered the room and stood beyond the microphone. I did not notice him until I praised a customer named King during a match. Ash looked displeased by the name. I continued playing and called the customer brilliant. The expression on Ash became darker. When the order ended, I removed the headphones and found him beside me. He asked what kind of work required me to praise strange men after midnight. I explained the business. Customers paid for company, skilled play, and emotional encouragement. Some wanted to be called boss, some wanted to be called captain, and some wanted to pretend they were famous. I provided a service and established clear limits. I added that one customer had asked me to call him husband, so I blocked him. Ash did not appear comforted. I suspected the missing memories had damaged the part of his brain responsible for reasonable reactions. I crouched beside the man and saw an old mark on his left wrist. My heart lurched. I knew that mark. In my first life, when I was imprisoned and waiting to die, a silent man with the same mark had secretly helped me. I had never clearly seen his face, but I remembered the warmth of his hand. The stranger was nearly 2 meters tall and far heavier than he looked. By the time I carried him to my second-floor apartment, I was certain my spine had become dust. Sonny helped in his own way. He brought the medical box, pulled the rug away from the blood, and stood beneath the lamp while I wrapped the wound in the stranger's abdomen. The bleeding would not stop, so I ran through the rain to the nearby clinic and dragged Dr. Kyle Young out of bed. Kyle stared at me with the exhausted expression of a man who had seen this foolishness too many times. "What did you pick up now?" he asked. "Person," I said. "A very large person, and he is losing blood." Kyle stitched the wound and examined the stranger. He said the man had a strong constitution and would survive, though he might develop a fever during the night. After Kyle left, I fed Sonny beef and apple while I ate instant noodles by the window. The rain awakened memories I preferred to bury. In my first life, the Dawson family had adopted me and raised me for one purpose. Their precious youngest son, Noah, had a weak heart. I was nothing more than a living supply of spare organs. They kept me obedient, destroyed my confidence, scarred my face, and finally placed me on a cold operating table. Sonny died trying to protect me. Then I opened my eyes 6 years before my death. I escaped before the fire that had trapped me inside the Dawson estate, changed my identity, hid my unusual eyes behind brown contact lenses, and built a quiet life in District X. My left eye was amber and my right eye was green, a rare feature the Dawson family could use to find me. I wanted no revenge and no heroic destiny. I wanted food, freedom, games, and enough money to keep Sonny healthy. Near midnight, the wounded man developed a fever. I wiped his skin with warm water while Sonny watched from the floor. I wondered aloud if our guest was another unfortunate side character in the same cruel novel. Sonny blinked at me, and I realized I had forgotten my contact lenses. I put them in at once and promised myself to be more careful. The next morning, I entered the bedroom and found the stranger awake. His gaze was cold enough to stop me in the doorway. Neither Sonny nor I dared to move. The silence became so complete that I could hear rainwater dripping from the balcony. I forced myself to smile and explained the situation again, using the respectful tone one normally reserved for a dangerous gang leader. I told him this was my apartment, that I had carried him home, and that no one here intended to hurt him. Sonny remained beside my ankle with every muscle tense. The man looked around the tiny room. His gaze paused on the bright tiger-patterned pajamas I had put on him because they were the only clothes large enough. His face darkened. I hurried to explain that the pajamas were completely new and had been a free gift from the supermarket. The explanation did not improve his mood. When he needed to stand, I placed his arm around my shoulders and guided him slowly toward the bathroom. 15 steps took nearly 5 minutes. His hands were wrapped so heavily that he could not manage his clothes. I offered help, covered my own eyes, and promised that I would behave like a proper caregiver. He said nothing, which I chose to interpret as permission. Afterward, I settled him back in bed and fed him porridge. His first doubtful bite was followed by a second, then a third until the bowl was empty. I felt absurdly proud. Food had always been my safest way of expressing affection. In my first life, I rarely had enough to eat, so feeding someone now felt like proof that I controlled my own life. I asked if he remembered parents, siblings, friends, or an address. Every question brought the same answer. Nothing. He only knew that somewhere in the world there was a person he had to find. His injuries needed fresh bandages every 6 hours. I changed them carefully and inspected the stitches for infection. He watched my face instead of the wound. Whenever I caught him staring, I asked whether I had rice on my cheek. He always looked away without answering. I bought him simple black clothes, underwear, a toothbrush, a towel, and an electric razor that cost far more than I wanted to spend. Standing before the men's clothing counter, I tried to estimate his size and became so embarrassed that a clerk asked whether I needed assistance. I fled with the largest size available. At home, I studied the razor instructions several times before touching his face. My hands shook because I feared cutting him. He asked if I was afraid of him. I ordered him to remain silent while I concentrated. When the rough shadow disappeared from his jaw, his full appearance emerged. He was so striking that I forgot to move. Ash raised one eyebrow. I declared that my work was excellent and immediately offered to wash his hair as well. That was when he asked why I cared so much for a stranger. I explained that I had rescued him and that he was safe. His expression softened for a moment, then his eyes closed. When I reached forward to check his breathing, his hand shot out and locked around my wrist. "I am a good person," I said quickly. "I truly rescued you." He studied my face, released me, and fell asleep again. I fled the room with Sonny and pressed a hand over my racing heart. The man was injured, yet his presence still felt like a drawn blade. I went to the market for ingredients and made fish, vegetables, liver, and rice porridge. When the fragrance filled the apartment, my guest woke again. He ate every spoonful I offered, though he looked suspicious at first. When I asked his name, pain crossed his face. He remembered nothing except that he had been searching for someone. Since he was quiet and impossibly heavy, I gave him the temporary name Ash. He accepted it with a small nod. Sonny gave me a look that clearly questioned my creativity. Ash needed help with everything while his hands and abdomen were bandaged. I supported him to the bathroom, washed his hair, changed his clothes, shaved his face, and fed him. He was embarrassed, but I told him to think of me as a professional caregiver. In truth, I had worked as an orderly during my first life, and caring for him felt natural. When he asked why I treated him so well, I could not tell him that he had once been the only person who showed me kindness. Instead, my mouth moved faster than my mind. "You are exactly my type," I said. Sonny made a sound of deep disapproval. Ash stared at me and my face grew hot. I insisted that his appearance and figure were the reason for my special care. The sharpness in his eyes slowly disappeared. That evening I took him to Kyle. The instant Kyle saw him, he fell out of his chair. He pulled me into a small treatment room and demanded to know where I had found such a dangerous man. Kyle had met Ash during his years in the military. He did not know his name, but he knew that Ash came from a powerful family and had enemies who would not hesitate to kill. Kyle examined him and found no serious injury to his head. His memory might return the next day or the next year. There was no way to know. On our walk home, I suggested several ridiculous ways to restore his memory, including frightening him or striking his head with a stick. Ash looked at me until I agreed that patience was safer. I earned my living as a voice streamer and a skilled game companion under the name Ethan B. I never showed my face because fame could lead the Dawson family to me. That night Ash sat beside me while I worked. His deep voice accidentally entered the broadcast when he praised my gaming skills. My viewers went wild and demanded to know if the mysterious man was my boyfriend. I claimed he was only an older brother staying with me. Ash leaned close and said he wanted to hear me call him that. His breath touched my ear, and I nearly forgot how to speak. My viewers filled the chat with teasing messages. They said his voice sounded like that of a cold company president in a romance drama. They demanded that he greet them again. Ash leaned toward the microphone and calmly said hello. The number of viewers rose so quickly that I stared at the screen in disbelief. I warned everyone not to become excited. They immediately became more excited. Some insisted I had secretly found a boyfriend. Others demanded that I call him older brother in my sweetest voice. Ash said he wanted to hear it as well. I covered the microphone and accused him of destroying my professional reputation. He asked why I looked embarrassed if my earlier claim about liking him had been true. I told him that private feelings and public entertainment were different things. He seemed unconvinced, but the smallest smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The following night, a customer entered my game and began shouting insults. The platform automatically closed my broadcast because of the offensive language. Ash told me to find the customer. I refunded the order and blocked the account instead. I said civilized people did not waste energy wrestling in mud. The attack had been arranged by rival streamers. Their supporters flooded my page with claims that I had no skill and survived by pleasing wealthy patrons. I had endured insults before, but they also targeted Theo. That crossed a line I could not ignore. Theo had sent his first donation when I was poor enough to divide one meal across 2 days. He never treated me as entertainment he had purchased. He treated me as a friend. When the hateful messages made him collapse, I collected every piece of public evidence left by the attackers and published a careful record of their scheme. The truth spread quickly. Advertisers withdrew from the rival channels, and several people received legal notices. Theo woke in the hospital and apologized for worrying me. I told him to save his strength and let adults handle the fighting, though I was only 1 year older than he was. Ash remained beside me through the entire night. He did not understand streaming culture, but he understood threats. Each time a cruel message appeared, his fingers tightened. I placed my hand over his and reminded him that words from strangers could not decide my worth. The next evening the platform had changed. Moderators removed abuse within seconds, and the accounts that organized the attack were gone. I praised the company for suddenly developing good judgment. I did not know that Sebastian Grant now owned it. My viewers did not forget the mysterious voice beside me. They filled the chat with requests for the cold older brother to return. I asked Ash whether he wanted to greet them. He considered the microphone as if it might contain a hidden weapon, then leaned forward and calmly wished everyone a pleasant evening. The reaction nearly froze my computer. Gifts covered the screen. Several viewers announced that his voice alone could support a separate channel. Others wanted us to play as a pair. I reminded them that he was recovering from an injury and had no account. They offered to create one for him. I rejected the idea. The more attention Ash received, the more likely his enemies were to locate us. I covered the small camera with tape even though it was already disabled. Ash asked why I was so afraid of being seen. I said online fame created unnecessary trouble. He accepted the answer, but I knew he had noticed how carefully I hid my face. I worked until early morning. Ash remained beside the desk watching each game. He learned the rules quickly and began predicting my decisions. When I made a risky move, his hand moved toward the keyboard as if he wanted to take control. I told him that silent observers were not allowed to command professional players. At 3 in the morning, I finished the last order and took Sunny for a walk. The town was quiet, and cool air carried the smell of wet stone. I returned, checked the lock, and entered the bedroom without remembering that Ash was already there. The air conditioner made the room cold. Half asleep, I climbed into bed and moved toward the nearest source of warmth. By morning, one of my arms rested across Ash and his hand circled my waist. I woke first. My mind required several seconds to understand the situation. Then I looked beneath the blanket to make sure I had not torn his stitches. Ash opened his eyes and asked whether I had finished checking him. I said that my sleeping posture was excellent and that he should be grateful. He pulled the blanket higher with an expression that suggested the opposite. I escaped to the kitchen and prepared noodles for him, rice with chicken for Sunny, and leftover porridge for myself. Ash objected to the difference between our meals and placed part of his food in my bowl. I explained that Sunny was a respected senior member of the family. Sunny wagged his tail in agreement. Ash asked about my income, schedule, and plans. I told him that streaming paid enough for rent and food. During good months, I saved money. During bad months, I accepted more game orders. I had once received an invitation to join a professional team, but public tournaments required cameras and real identification. He said I deserved a larger stage. I said staying alive was more valuable than applause. Ash looked at me for a long time, then asked to borrow my phone. I assumed he wanted to search for memories or read the news. He entered numbers and charts while I fought sleep. Eventually, I told him to turn off the light and went to bed. 3 days later, an unfamiliar financial application sent a notice. The balance displayed was 10 times greater than the money I had allowed Ash to use. I checked the number repeatedly and accused him of gambling. He said he had invested. I knew nothing about markets, but I recognized calm confidence. I praised him so sincerely that he looked away. I decided to keep the money safe for his future. Perhaps he would need it to rebuild his life, marry someone, or escape another attack. The suggestion of marriage made his mood colder. I reminded him that people with remarkable faces always attracted admirers. He asked whether I was one of them. I pretended not to hear and began washing dishes. His wounds improved quickly. The injuries on his hands almost closed, and the stitches in his abdomen would soon be removed. I should have felt relieved. Instead, every sign of recovery reminded me that he would leave. I had spent years avoiding attachment because losing people hurt more than loneliness. Sunny was the exception. Kyle was the exception. Theo was the exception. Somehow Ash had become another exception before I understood what was happening. One of my most loyal viewers was Theo Grant, a 17-year-old student from Capital City. Theo had supported me when my channel was small, and we had become close friends. He was wealthy, impulsive, and kind. His uncle Sebastian Grant was a feared businessman who had raised him with strict affection. When rival streamers hired people to insult me and sabotage my account, Theo defended me until he became ill from anger. I gathered evidence and exposed the attackers, while Sebastian quietly bought the entire streaming platform and removed every account involved. I did not know this until much later. Ash became furious whenever anyone insulted me. He also became strangely jealous when I spoke to customers or exchanged messages with Theo. When I told him that people sometimes paid me to call them boss, his expression grew so dark that I wondered whether he had developed a second fever. He asked to borrow my phone one evening. 3 days later, I discovered that he had opened an investment account and multiplied a small amount of my savings many times over. He claimed that he did it by instinct. I stared at the number and decided that even without his memory, he was clearly built to be rich. I promised to save the money for his future marriage. He did not appear pleased. Danger soon found us. A group of armed men entered the neighborhood and searched every apartment while pretending to perform a building inspection. I hid Ash inside a secret storage space above the balcony, concealed his belongings, and bought a durian to cover the smell of medicine. The men searched twice but found nothing. When they finally left, Ash climbed down and calmly wiped the sweat from my forehead. The first search lasted 5 minutes. I sat on the floor and ate durian while more than 10 men opened cupboards and looked under the furniture. I even offered them a piece. Their leader covered his nose and refused. A sound came from the bedroom, and 3 men moved toward the door with their hands inside their jackets. I shouted for them to stop. The door opened, and Sunny bounded into the room, wagging his tail. I held up a piece of fruit and scolded him for begging. The men relaxed, but my heart continued hammering. They left, then returned 10 minutes later in an attempt to surprise me. I welcomed them with the same innocent expression and asked whether their inspection was still unfinished. The durian smell drove them away more quickly the second time. Only after every neighbor confirmed that the strangers had left did I lower the folding ladder from the balcony ceiling. Ash emerged without complaint, even though the hiding place had barely contained his shoulders. Sunny followed him around, demanding the durian reward he believed he had earned. I warned Sunny that another bite would send him to the animal clinic. Then someone knocked again. I almost threw the ladder through the window before realizing the visitor was Aunt Linda, our landlord. She had come to make sure the strangers had not stolen anything. When the door finally closed, I sat on the floor because my knees no longer supported me. Ash wiped my forehead. His calmness made me angry. He had looked ready to fight an entire group while still covered in stitches. I told him that his life mattered, especially if someone was waiting for him. He listened with an unreadable expression. Ash said that if the men discovered him, he would create a path for me and Sunny to escape. I rejected that plan immediately. I had not carried him through rain, cooked enough food for a small army, and spent my savings on an expensive razor merely to watch him die. He almost smiled at the mention of the razor. I asked again about the person he needed to find. He could not describe a face, but he remembered 2 different colors, fire, and the feeling that he had arrived too late. The words sent coldness through my body. I hid the reaction by opening the windows to release the durian smell. The mismatched colors could mean anything. Fire appeared in many memories. I refused to build hope from fragments. At the market I chose 2 fish, beef, tofu, and fresh vegetables. I withdrew cash from a machine and visited Kyle to invite him for dinner. He was resting in his chair and nearly fell when I shouted through the door. Back home, I prepared beef stew and fish soup. Sunny brought his cushion to the patch of sunlight beside the window and pressed his head against my leg. I promised him apple after dinner. Ash watched me move through the kitchen. He offered help, but I told him to protect the stitches. He sat at the table and cut vegetables slowly with one bandaged hand. The domestic scene looked so natural that I forgot he belonged to another world. During dinner, he filled my bowl with beef and said I was too thin. I lifted my shirt and showed him that I possessed abdominal muscles. They were not clearly separated like his, but they existed. His gaze stopped on my waist. I stepped closer and asked whether he was impressed. His fingers tightened around the chopsticks. He told me never to lift my clothes in front of other people. I said he was not another person. The sentence escaped quietly. He asked me to repeat it, and I immediately changed the words into a compliment about his face. His stern expression broke. He laughed, low and brief. I laughed with him because the distance between us suddenly felt smaller. The summer heat made bathing necessary, but his wounds could not touch water. He insisted he could manage alone. I reminded him that both hands remained bandaged. After several minutes of argument, he surrendered. I wiped his shoulders and back with professional focus. Old scars crossed the muscles beneath my hands. Some came from blades, others from bullets, and several looked like injuries left by training. No pampered air earned such marks. When I reached the more private areas, I turned my head and completed the task by touch. The room felt too warm. I joked that Ash had been staring at me because my face was irresistible. He leaned forward until our eyes were level. My heart began striking my ribs. I asked whether his fever had returned. I offered to call Kyle. The tension disappeared because my mouth had once again defeated romance. Ash sat back and said my eyes resembled those of the person he was searching for. I became excited and questioned him until the headache returned. He remembered only color and warmth. I told him not to force the memory. Recovery mattered more. That night, when strangers insulted me during the broadcast, Ash looked ready to break the computer. I placed a hand on his wrist and told the viewers that being an orphan did not make me miserable. I had a safe home, a loyal dog, work I enjoyed, and people who cared for me. As I spoke, Ash watched me with an expression I could not read. Later he asked whether I truly considered myself happy. I said happiness was not a permanent state. It was a collection of ordinary moments, a warm meal, rain outside a locked window, Sunny breathing nearby, and someone waiting when work ended. Ash said he wanted to become one of those moments. I went to the market to calm myself and returned with fish, tofu, and beef. Sunny carried his cushion to my favorite corner by the window. I sat there with him and enjoyed the simple freedom of sunlight, fresh food, and an unlocked door. The Dawson family had once controlled when I slept, what I ate, and where I walked. Now I could cook at midnight, stream until dawn, or lie in the sun with my dog. No fortune could have felt greater. I scolded him for not fearing death. He said that if they found him, he would fight. I reminded him that he was searching for someone, and that he could hardly find them after being buried by his enemies. He looked at me in silence, as if the person he wanted was already standing in front of him. Our small apartment gradually became a home for 2 men and 1 opinionated dog. I cooked beef stew and fish soup. Ash filled my bowl and complained that I was too thin. I lifted my shirt to show him that I had abdominal muscles, though they were not as impressive as his. He stared at my waist and told me never to undress so casually in front of other people. "You are not other people," I murmured. He asked me to repeat myself, so I escaped by calling him handsome. For the first time, I heard him laugh. Later, while I helped him bathe without wetting his wounds, I joked that he was staring because I was beautiful. He leaned close enough for my heart to lose its rhythm. Then he said my eyes resembled the eyes of the person he needed to find. I became excited because I thought his memory was returning. I did not realize that he was beginning to recognize me through instincts stronger than memory. Our peaceful routine ended when Leonard Lee, the landlord's violent son, broke into my apartment and demanded that I leave. He had gambled away his own property and wanted to take the last building from his mother. When I threatened to call the police, he attacked me. Sonny bit his leg, and Leonard raised an iron bar to strike him. Ash kicked open the locked bedroom door. The murderous look on his face sent Leonard running. I tried to stand and discovered that my leg was badly injured. Ash carried me to Kyle's clinic, where Kyle scolded him for failing to protect me. I explained that I had locked Ash inside. Kyle set my leg in a cast, repaired the stitches Ash had torn while rescuing me, and forced Leonard to pay my medical expenses. Leonard did not leave immediately. He sat in the courtyard and shouted that his mother had betrayed him. The neighbors gathered around and condemned him for attacking a young tenant and pushing his own mother. He kicked a trash container because he could not fight the entire street. Sonny ran ahead and returned with Kyle. I had never trained him to seek the doctor, yet he understood exactly where help could be found. Kyle examined my leg while insulting everyone involved. He told Ash that a man of his size should be useful for something. I defended Ash because I had locked him in the bedroom to protect his identity. Kyle placed a sweet in my mouth and ordered me to stop talking. The bone had cracked but had not moved out of position. Kyle wrapped the leg and warned me not to place weight on it. If the bone shifted, he said, doctors might need to break and reset it. The description made my face lose color. Only then did I notice blood spreading across the bandage on the abdomen of Ash. Kicking through the door had opened the wound. I lifted his shirt, shouted for Kyle, and forgot my own pain. Kyle treated him while criticizing both of us. I looked at my white cast and the bandages covering Ash, then said we formed a perfect pair, one man with a useless leg and one with useless hands. Ash promised that his hands would recover first, which meant he would care for me. Leonard arrived at the clinic later because of the bite from Sonny. He shouted when he saw me and tried to attack again. Ash moved once and Leonard landed on the floor. Kyle struck the table and threatened to remove everyone if the noise continued. Aunt Linda cried and apologized. Kyle took control of the settlement. Leonard would pay for my treatment and return the unused rent and deposit because the apartment had been damaged. I would pay for the preventive injection required after a dog bite. Leonard had no choice but to agree. I accepted the money but felt no satisfaction. Aunt Linda had once brought me vegetables and treated me kindly. Her love for a selfish son had slowly turned into fear and surrender. I hoped she would finally protect herself. Ash carried me from the clinic. I asked why he had remained silent. He said that if he spoke while angry, Leonard might not survive the conversation. That answer ended my questions. During the first night with the cast, pain woke me. I shifted once, and Ash rose immediately. I admitted that I needed the bathroom and insisted I could move by myself. The moment I tried, dizziness filled my vision. Ash lifted me as if I weighed nothing. I asked him to wait outside the bathroom. He looked at the cast and asked whether I could stand. I could not. Embarrassment followed me through the entire process. Ash remained calm and practical. When he carried me back, I told him he was unexpectedly kind. He covered me with the blanket and said I had cared for him in exactly the same way. I denied helping with anything that embarrassing. He reminded me of every bath. I disappeared beneath the blanket and ordered him to sleep. After his breathing became steady, I removed my contact lenses. I had worn them before he woke every morning and removed them only after he slept. Maintaining the secret required constant attention. I placed the lenses in their case and studied his sleeping face. The person who once frightened me now rose at the slightest sound of pain. I wondered what he would think if he saw my real eyes. For the next few weeks, Ash cared for me as devotedly as I had cared for him. He carried me to the bathroom, pushed my wheelchair through the market, learned to cook, washed my hair, and refused to let me lock the bathroom door in case I fell. At night, he dried my hair until I slept. His first attempt to shop alone ended with empty hands. He returned wearing the expression of a man who had gone to negotiate a military surrender instead of buying vegetables. The market sellers had been too frightened to name their prices. I made him carry me there the next day. The women at the market surrounded my wheelchair, gave me fruit, and complained about my injured leg. Ash stood behind me holding every bag while no one dared to speak directly to him. I introduced him as my older brother who had come to care for me. He did not correct the lie, but he remained silent during the entire walk home. I told him that he would not need to do ordinary chores once his memories returned and he went back to his own life. He immediately said that he wanted to do them. The firmness of his answer made my chest feel warm. At home, he learned cooking with alarming speed. After watching me prepare one meal, he could repeat it perfectly. Kyle tasted his soup and admitted it was good, then ordered him to watch my leg carefully. Kyle also revealed that he had once seen Ash injured during military service. Ash had frightened everyone around him even while covered in blood. At night, the cast became painful and uncomfortable. The slightest movement woke Ash. He lifted me without complaint and carried me wherever I needed to go. The first time I thanked him, he reminded me that I had done the same for him. I pulled the blanket over my face because he also reminded me of the baths I had helped him take. One morning I woke with my hand resting on his abdomen. Instead of moving away, I inspected the muscles and complained that all my careful feeding had failed to make him gain any softness. Ash opened his eyes and asked whether I had finished examining him. I withdrew my hand so quickly that Sonny lifted his head in surprise. The cast gave me too much time to observe Ash. He exercised every day, changed clothes without embarrassment, and always seemed to know when I was looking. I promised myself that I would exercise as soon as my leg healed. He looked at my waist and said I did not need to change anything. The more gentle he became, the less I understood my own heart. Ash pushed my wheelchair to the market after his failed shopping attempt. The sellers gave me fruit, eggs, and enough sympathy for an entire village. They ignored him until I introduced him as my older brother. Several women praised his appearance from a safe distance. On the way home, I told him that serious expressions frightened ordinary people. He said he had no reason to smile at strangers. I told him that market sellers controlled our food and therefore deserved diplomacy. The next time he went alone, he returned with vegetables and one awkward smile that had apparently convinced everyone to reduce the price. He learned how to wash rice, cut meat, and season soup. At first, he followed every instruction with military precision. Later, he began adjusting flavors because he knew what I preferred. He removed ginger from my bowl without being asked and saved the best pieces of beef for me. I complained that he exercised too much while I became soft from sitting. He said my body looked fine. I accused him of being biased. He did not deny it. When he helped me bathe, he refused to let me lock the door. I said he had become controlling. He said he had become responsible. While washing my hair, his fingers moved with such gentleness that I often fell asleep. One evening, a package from Theo arrived with vitamins, snacks, and a handwritten list of instructions. Theo called immediately. We talked for 2 hours about school, games, and the people who irritated him. He forgot that Sebastian was standing nearby until a deep voice ordered him to finish homework. Ash listened to the call and asked whether Theo was my boyfriend. I nearly swallowed a fish bone. I explained that Theo was 17, my best friend, and practically a younger brother. Ash continued filling my bowl and asked whether I already loved someone. I said no. He asked whether I could consider him. The question struck so directly that I thought I had misunderstood. He reminded me of my claim that he was my type. I admitted that the claim had been an excuse to make him feel safe. Hurt moved across his face before he hid it. I tried to explain that I truly liked him, first as a patient, then as a roommate, and now as someone like an older brother. Every category sounded worse than the previous one. Ash asked whether gratitude was the only reason I kept him. I could not answer because gratitude had stopped explaining my feelings days ago. He described the things he liked about me. My voice when I greeted Sunny, my habit of giving others the best food, my courage when armed men searched the apartment, my stubborn optimism, and the eyes I believed I had hidden. I froze at the final words. Ash touched the edge of one contact lens and said he had seen the real colors during the fever night. He had chosen not to question me. Fear entered my chest, but his expression held no threat. He said my secrets belonged to me until I wished to share them. That respect changed something between us. I asked whether his affection could be dependence created by injury and memory loss. He considered the possibility. Then he said dependence might explain why he needed me, but not why he wanted to kiss me. My face became hot enough to warm the entire room. I told him to recover his memory before making promises. He agreed, but added that returning memories would not change the way his body reacted when I came close. Sunny placed both paws over his nose. I understood the judgment. One evening he asked whether Theo was my boyfriend. I laughed and said Theo was only a friend. Ash placed his chopsticks down and asked whether he was not the kind of man I liked. I finally admitted that my earlier confession had been an excuse to make him trust me. His expression closed at once. I tried to repair the damage by saying that I liked him as a patient, then a roommate, then an older brother. Every word made the room colder. When I asked why he cared, Ash calmly listed everything he admired about me. My kindness, my courage, my humor, my voice, my eyes, and the way I always remembered what everyone liked to eat. I could not meet his gaze. He said that all the money he earned belonged to me. He also said he was certain that no lover had ever dared to approach him before me. I began to suspect that I had rescued a shameless man rather than a silent one. Before I could answer his feelings, I was kidnapped because of Kyle. Victor Hawk, Kyle's former lover, had spent 8 years searching for him. Victor's men could not find Kyle, so they used me as bait. They injured my already broken leg and threatened to record my suffering. The kidnappers covered my eyes and carried me into an abandoned building. They believed Kyle would surrender if they hurt someone he cared about. When they learned that I did not know where he had gone, they struck my cast and discussed what kind of evidence would force him to appear. I had left home for a short errand. A vehicle stopped beside the curb, fabric covered my face, and strong hands pulled me inside. The cast prevented me from fighting properly. I counted turns and listened for traffic, but the road became too confusing. Inside the building, the men tied my wrists to a chair. They asked where Kyle lived and who protected him. I told them he lived in his clinic, which they already knew. One man hit the cast with his shoe. White pain erased my next breath. They spoke about Victor as though his desire was law. Kyle had disappeared 8 years before after a relationship filled with control, suspicion, and violence. Victor believed enough pressure would force him to return. I said that hurting Kyle's friends would only prove that he was right to run. The leader told me that my opinion had no value. He raised a phone and threatened to record what happened next. I looked at the door and prepared to survive in any way I could. The first sound was not an explosion or a shout. It was the quiet click of the lock breaking. Ash entered. He saw the ropes, the bruises, and the cracked edge of my cast. His expression became empty. That emptiness frightened the kidnappers more than anger. The first man reached for a weapon. Ash crossed the room and struck his wrist before the weapon cleared his coat. Another attacked from behind. Ash turned, used the man's movement against him, and sent him into the wall. I had known Ash was dangerous. I had not known how complete that danger could be. Injury and lost memory had hidden the training inside him, but protecting me brought it back. When the room became still, he knelt and untied my hands. His fingers shook. I told him my leg hurt, but I was alive. He lifted me carefully and pressed his forehead against mine for 1 second. Victor arrived with Kyle and several guards. Victor wore an expensive coat and the expression of a man accustomed to obedience. Kyle looked at the injured people, then looked at Victor with cold disappointment. Victor claimed he had never ordered anyone to hurt me. Kyle replied that men who use fear eventually lose control of the fear they create. I told Victor that if he wanted Kyle, he should begin by becoming someone Kyle could approach without danger. Until then, I would help Kyle disappear anywhere in the world. Victor asked who I thought I was. I said I was the injured person his men had dragged into a warehouse, which gave me the right to speak. Ash tightened his arms around me. Victor noticed and stopped arguing. Back at the clinic, Kyle removed the damaged cast and checked the bone. I watched his face for signs of bad news. He finally said the position remained stable. I announced that my leg possessed the strength of a hero. Kyle said my leg possessed the luck of a fool. Ash stayed beside the bed that night. A nightmare returned me to the operating room. I woke unable to breathe and found his arms around me. He did not demand an explanation. He counted slow breaths until my body followed his. I told him that I had once trusted a family who planned to kill me. I did not mention Rebirth or the novel, but I described the basement and the fear of medical rooms. Ash listened without interrupting. He promised that no one would take me anywhere against my will again. I wanted to believe him. For the first time, belief did not feel foolish. I listened to them mention Victor and slowly understood. Kyle had abandoned a powerful lover 8 years earlier. Victor had confused possession with devotion, and his men now believed cruelty would bring Kyle back. I wanted to tell them that this strategy explained why Kyle kept running, but survival advised silence. When footsteps exploded through the corridor, the men turned toward the door. Ash entered with the terrifying stillness he had shown on the morning he woke in my apartment. His gaze found my injured leg, and something inside him snapped. He moved too quickly for me to follow. By the time Victor appeared, every kidnapper was on the floor. Victor looked wealthy, arrogant, and completely certain that the world should obey him. He barely glanced at me before turning to Kyle, who had arrived behind Ash. Kyle told Victor that 8 years of pursuit could not erase the harm he had caused. Victor tried to apologize without understanding what an apology required. I stood between them and announced that I would personally help Kyle disappear again if Victor continued to behave like a criminal. Victor looked offended. Kyle almost smiled. Ash carried me back to the clinic. I joked that my cast had survived more battles than most soldiers. Kyle threatened to sedate me if I continued speaking while he examined the injury. Fortunately, the bone had not shifted. Victor returned the next day with gifts and a new bruise on his face. Kyle accepted neither his excuses nor his attempt to revive their old relationship. Their reconciliation would take years, and only after Victor learned that love did not grant ownership. Ash arrived before they could go further. The moment he saw me on the floor, the last restraint in him disappeared. He defeated every man in the building and carried me back to the clinic. Victor arrived soon after and confronted Kyle. Their history was bitter, complicated, and unfinished, but I was far more concerned about whether my leg would need another cast. That night, I dreamed of the operating room from my first life. I woke shaking, and Ash held me until I could breathe. His arms felt safer than any locked door. The next morning, Victor's men came to apologize. They addressed me with respect and nearly fell over one another when Ash walked out of the kitchen holding a knife. It was then that his assistant, Liam Reed, finally found him and revealed his identity. Ash was Adrian Foster, the heir and acting chairman of the Foster Group. The name appeared in financial news, military reports, and photographs from formal events. Every image showed the same cold face I had covered in shaving foam. In one photograph, Adrian stood before hundreds of employees while cameras flashed. In another, he left a government meeting surrounded by security. I looked from the screen to the man wearing my cheap black shirt. The difference between his public life and my apartment was so absurd that I began laughing. Adrian asked what amused me. I showed him a photograph of himself in a suit worth more than my annual rent, then pointed at the tiger pajamas drying on the balcony. He closed the news page. Liam explained that Adrian had disappeared after uncovering corruption inside the company. Several relatives believed his death would allow them to divide the Foster group. The men searching District X had worked for one of those relatives. The knowledge turned my fear into anger. Someone had stabbed him, left him in rain, and then sent armed men through poor neighborhoods to finish the work. Wealth did not make powerful families civilized. It merely gave cruelty better clothing. Adrian needed to return before the traitors destroyed the company. I told him that I understood. My voice remained cheerful until I entered the kitchen and faced the sink. Then I gripped the counter because the apartment already felt empty. He came behind me and asked whether I wanted him to stay. I said wanting and needing were different. He had responsibilities and a life beyond me. I would never become another person who used affection as a chain. Adrian placed his hand over mine. He said returning did not require leaving me. I pretended the water made my eyes wet. His enemies had stabbed him and left him to die because they wanted control of the company. Even without his memories, Adrian had remained the most dangerous man in Capital City. I expected him to return to his world and forget our tiny apartment. Instead, when I tried to leave District X alone, he followed me into the night. I slipped on the wet road, and he caught me against his chest. I had packed while everyone slept because empty rooms frightened me. Kyle had left to settle matters with Victor, and Adrian had recovered enough of his identity to return to Capital City. I believed our strange household had already reached its end. The apartment looked wounded after the attack by Leonard and the search by armed men. The table remained cracked, the door required repair, and one wall carried marks from the forced entry. Aunt Linda had returned the deposit. There was no practical reason to stay. Still, every corner held a memory. The window where Sonny slept, the sofa where Adrian first laughed, the kitchen where he learned to cut vegetables, and the desk where his voice entered my broadcast. Leaving felt like closing a brief, impossible chapter. I placed the last bowl in a box and thanked the room for protecting us. Sonny rode on my back while I dragged a suitcase down the dark street. I told myself that leaving first meant I could not be abandoned. Then my injured leg slipped on wet stone. Adrian caught me before I reached the ground. His expression held a fear I had never seen before. Liam stood beneath a tree with the luggage Adrian had apparently prepared. Sonny looked from Adrian to me and released a long sigh. "May I go with you?" he asked. "Without you, I am afraid." Liam stood nearby and pretended not to hear. Sonny looked at Adrian as if his performance lacked dignity. I agreed, and the four of us moved to Capital City. Adrian placed us in a secure apartment and returned to the Foster group. A traitor who believed Adrian was dead tried to seize power during a board meeting. Adrian entered the room, exposed the man, and sent him to prison before lunch. His memory of business remained almost perfect, yet the personal memories surrounding the person he sought were still broken. Liam and I created a careful list of every person Adrian needed to recognize, every meeting he needed to attend, and every event that had occurred during his absence. Adrian studied corporate reports with the same concentration he once used to study my face. I spent part of my streaming savings to build a discreet office for him, though he later returned every coin many times over. The secure apartment in Capital City had more rooms than our entire building in District X. I became lost on the first morning and opened a storage room while searching for the kitchen. Sonny explored with confidence and chose the most expensive carpet as his new sleeping place. Adrian assigned guards outside, but I refused anyone inside the home. I needed doors that belonged to me. He understood and gave me every code and key. Liam brought stacks of reports. We hid the memory loss from most employees because weakness attracted enemies. I created cards with photographs and short descriptions. Adrian learned names, relationships, recent projects, and private conflicts. His ability frightened me. He could read a page once and repeat almost every number. Business knowledge returned through instinct. Personal memories remained covered by fog. Sometimes a smell or touch produced a fragment. The sound of rain gave him headaches. Fire made him restless. My eyes brought both comfort and pain. I used money from streaming to pay for a temporary office setup because I wanted to contribute. Adrian said the amount was unnecessary. I said accepting help was part of recovery. He accepted, then quietly placed ownership of a much larger investment account in my name. Liam treated me with careful respect. At first he called me Mr. Bennett. After watching me order Adrian to finish soup and take medicine, he began looking at me as the only person capable of controlling a natural disaster. The night before the board meeting, Adrian stood before the window and studied the city. I asked whether he was nervous. He said no. His hand held mine too tightly for the answer to be true. I reminded him that he had survived a stabbing, amnesia, tiger pajamas, my cooking experiments, and a durian search. A room of greedy executives could not defeat him. He kissed my knuckles and said the tiger pajamas had been the greatest challenge. The next morning I accompanied him to the company. Employees stopped walking when he entered the lobby. Some looked relieved, some terrified, and some already guilty. In the boardroom, the traitor continued speaking for several seconds before noticing Adrian at the door. He accused us of using a double. Adrian named the place of the attack, described the blade, and asked whether the man wished to repeat his confession for the police. The traitor shouted that Adrian should have died in the alley. Security recorded every word. Adrian ended the struggle without raising his voice. The man was removed, his financial records were seized, and the board confirmed Adrian within an hour. Then Adrian left the victorious directors and crouched beside my chair to inspect my leg. I told him that every person in the room was watching. He said their education could begin with learning what mattered. The morning of his return, a heavy executive stood at the head of the boardroom and announced that Adrian was dead. Adrian opened the door before the man finished. The traitor became pale and shouted that he had personally stabbed Adrian. That confession saved the legal team considerable effort. Adrian called him useless and ordered security to take him away. Then he turned to me and asked whether my leg hurt after the long drive. Every person in the room stared. The feared chairman had returned from the dead and was worried about my ankle. At the company, employees quickly learned that Adrian's mood improved whenever I sat nearby. Reports were delivered to his office more frequently than necessary because everyone wanted to see the mysterious young man who could calm him with one sentence. I brought Sonny once, and several visitors complained about a local dog entering a luxury office. I showed them the health records and reminded them that manners were more valuable than pedigrees. Adrian listened from behind his desk and later ordered the company to support a local animal rescue program. When I visited the company, I saw a member of the Dawson family in the hallway. Terror dragged me back into the basement of my first life. I fled home, curled against a wall, and remembered their gentle lies. They had told me that family meant gratitude and obedience. They had called imprisonment protection. They had called murder love. Adrian began investigating my past. Liam discovered records of a child kept in a hidden basement and evidence that the Dawson family had searched for me after the fire. Adrian suffered severe headaches as fragments of memory returned, but he refused to stop. I refused to remain broken as well. I cooked steak called Adrian and asked about his day as if nothing had happened. Hearing his voice reminded me that this life was different. Our feelings finally crossed the distance between gratitude and love. Adrian kissed my forehead one night, and I returned the kiss. He promised to prove that he deserved a place in my life. When he held me, I felt happiness and fear in equal measure. The first kiss happened after a difficult day of investigation. Liam had found records connected to the Dawson estate, and the photographs of the basement brought back memories I could not control. Adrian found me sitting on the kitchen floor with Sonny pressed against my side. He did not lift me without permission. He sat beside me and waited. When I finally leaned toward him, he wrapped one arm around my shoulders. I told him that love had always been presented to me as a debt. Damien said I owed the family because they fed me. His wife said I owed Noah because he was sick. Every gift carried a hidden knife. Adrian said he wanted nothing I did not freely offer. He kissed my forehead, not my mouth. The gentleness made the gesture more dangerous to my defenses than desire could have been. I touched his face and returned the kiss in the same place. That was my answer. Afterward, our relationship changed slowly. Adrian asked before holding me when memories became difficult. He waited for my permission before moving closer at night. I learned that power could be quiet and that desire did not need to become control. I teased him because embarrassment was easier than sincerity. He responded by becoming increasingly shameless. If I praised his clothes, he asked whether I wanted to remove them. If I called him handsome, he asked whether I planned to reward him. Sonny judged both of us. When intimacy finally became part of our relationship, Adrian remained careful. Kyle had already explained protection, health, and the rare possibility of pregnancy. I believed we had followed every instruction. More important, I knew that each choice was mine. The next morning, Adrian studied every mark on my skin and asked whether anything hurt. I hid beneath the blanket and accused him of conducting a medical inspection. He brought breakfast to the bed and refused to attend work until I declared myself completely well. Liam adjusted the company schedule without surprise. Adrian became jealous of Theo, of my viewers, and sometimes even of Sonny. I teased him until he kissed me quiet. When he traveled for business, I joined him as an unofficial assistant. His partner, Julian Stone, was a powerful businessman with unusual amber and green eyes like mine. Julian treated me with unexpected warmth and gave me food during a formal dinner. I found him intimidating but strangely familiar. The business dinner began with a careless man advising Julian to marry and have children instead of spending his life in the company. The entire table became silent. Julian smiled with such perfect politeness that the speaker turned pale. I concentrated on my food and tried not to laugh. Julian chaired one of the largest independent companies in the region. He had built his power without relying on a family name and rarely allowed personal questions. The careless guest knew none of that or believed social rules did not apply to him. He said a man of Julian age should stop competing and create a family. Julian asked whether the guest planned to transfer his own company to a spouse after marriage. The guest became silent. I lowered my head over the soup. Adrian touched my knee beneath the table because he knew I was struggling not to smile. Julian noticed. Instead of taking offense, he asked whether I wanted another serving. I said the fish was excellent. He moved the entire plate closer to me. The gesture shocked everyone. Julian was known for distance, yet he treated me like a younger relative. I noticed his eyes again. One carried amber warmth, the other a green edge beneath the light. They resembled mine without the contacts. I told myself that rare eyes could appear in unrelated people. My heart did not believe the explanation. After dinner, Julian asked about my background. I gave the safe version: orphanage, small town, streaming work. Sadness crossed his face when I mentioned the orphanage. He said that any parent who abandoned a child had lost the greatest gift of life. I replied that perhaps some children were abandoned because their parents never knew where to search. Neither of us understood why the conversation left us shaken. The business trip continued for 2 days. I followed Adrian between meetings with a small notebook even though Liam had already prepared every document. Adrian said my presence helped him think. Liam said my presence helped everyone survive Adrian's mood. At the hotel, I woke early and found Adrian reading reports near the window. The city beneath us had not yet filled with traffic. I brought tea and stood beside him. He asked whether I enjoyed the trip. I said formal dinners required too much smiling, but the food was excellent. He said Julian had given me special attention. The neutral tone failed to hide jealousy. I reminded him that Julian was old enough to be an uncle. Adrian said age did not remove human eyes. I asked whether he planned to become jealous of every person who gave me food. He considered the question and said perhaps. I kissed his cheek and told him that he had personally fed me porridge, beef, fish, fruit, and half the contents of District X. His position remained secure. Adrian requested a proper kiss as confirmation. I accused him of using jealousy for profit. The return journey was quiet. Adrian slept beside me while I messaged Theo. Theo wanted to meet immediately and complained that Sebastian treated school like military duty. I promised hot pot on the weekend. Adrian woke while I smiled at the phone. His arm moved around my waist, and his chin rested against my shoulder. I continued typing because I had learned that acknowledging jealousy encouraged dramatic behavior. He touched my ear. I moved away. He kissed the side of my neck. I told Theo good night and placed the phone down. The room had become much warmer. I asked whether Adrian intended to explain his behavior. He said he had missed me while sitting beside me because my attention belonged to someone else. I turned, placed both arms around his neck, and said the feared chairman required more emotional discipline. He replied that discipline had limits around me. The next morning Liam adjusted another schedule. At the Foster office, I began spending occasional afternoons in a small room near Adrian's. Employees treated me with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. Reports received approval more quickly when I reminded Adrian to eat. One manager brought a problem involving a delayed shipment. Adrian identified 3 errors before the presentation ended. The manager left looking pale. I offered him a sweet from the bowl on my desk. He accepted with the expression of a soldier leaving battle. Rumors spread that I controlled company decisions. In reality, I understood only a fraction of the operations. My influence consisted of asking Adrian to rest before he frightened innocent employees. Liam explained the unwritten office rule. If the chairman had skipped lunch, fined Ethan. If he had slept less than 4 hours, fined Ethan. If he rejected every proposal without comment, place Sonny near the door and then fined Ethan. I demanded a consulting salary. Adrian transferred an amount large enough to make me return it. We compromised on dinner. One afternoon, I brought Sonny to the office after a veterinary appointment. A visiting client looked at his local breed and asked why a common street dog entered an executive floor. I said loyalty and intelligence did not require an expensive pedigree. The client suggested calling security. Adrian entered before I responded. He asked Liam to review whether the client company shared the values of Foster Group. The proposed partnership ended before sunset. I told Adrian that destroying a business agreement over one insult was excessive. He said the insult revealed how the man treated anyone considered weak. Such judgment affected employees and partners, not only dogs. I admitted the reasoning was sound. Sonny received praise and a piece of apple. His health examination showed perfect results. I hugged him inside the clinic and promised a feast. The memory of our poorest years returned. I had once counted coins to buy medicine while eating plain rice myself. Sonny refused food whenever I became too weak, forcing me to share his better meal. Now I could choose the best care. Money did not create love, but it removed some of the fear surrounding it. The clinic treated Sonny kindly. Another veterinary business nearby did not. I saw staff refuse care to a local dog while accepting a fashionable breed that arrived later. The owner of the local dog held a bleeding paw and begged. I recorded the refusal and asked for the policy in writing. The manager tried to remove me. Other customers began watching. A junior doctor finally treated the animal while the manager complained about cost. I paid the immediate bill and sent the evidence to the licensing organization. The clinic faced an investigation for discriminatory and unsafe practice. Adrian said I collected battles wherever I walked. I said the battles already existed. I simply refused to walk past them. He touched my hair and said that was the quality he loved and feared most. Kyle understood. He had spent years treating people who could not afford distant hospitals. His small clinic survived because the town trusted him. He accepted vegetables, repairs, and promises when patients lacked money. Victor once believed such work wasted Kyle's ability. After their reunion, he tried to buy a larger clinic without asking. Kyle rejected the building and nearly rejected Victor again. I explained to Victor that generosity without listening became another kind of control. If he wanted to help, he could ask what Kyle needed. Victor returned with a different question. Kyle requested updated equipment, medicine for low-income patients, and complete authority over every decision. Victor provided funds through a transparent program and placed no name on the building. That was the first gift Kyle accepted. Victor also apologized to me for the kidnapping. I told him that an apology required responsibility for the system he created, not only the orders he personally gave. He paid my medical expenses, assisted police, and dismissed every employee involved. Kyle watched these changes without offering immediate forgiveness. Victor continued anyway. Over time, his persistence became less about possession and more about becoming trustworthy. During one walk, I saw Victor following us from a respectful distance. Kyle noticed too. He asked whether Victor intended to hide behind the same tree all afternoon. Victor emerged with pastries. Kyle accepted one and told him to stop frightening pedestrians. Progress sometimes looked like that. Adrian and Victor rarely spoke. Each considered the other dangerous. I told them that competing over frightening expressions would not improve either relationship. Kyle agreed. At home, Adrian asked whether I thought Victor could change. I said people changed when they accepted that consequences did not guarantee forgiveness. Victor was finally learning. Adrian became quiet because the lesson also applied to us, though our greatest separation had not yet happened. Before sleep, he asked what I would do if he forgot me after recovering his memory. The question felt strange. I said memory did not select one person to erase. He said the headaches sometimes created empty moments. I suggested writing a record of our life. We created a private file with dates, photographs, medical information, and names. Liam received a sealed copy with instructions to show Adrian if confusion returned. Noah later tried to destroy that record, but Liam preserved most of it. The preparation helped Adrian find his way back, though not before I left. On better days, we did not discuss loss. We cooked, played games, and argued about sleep schedules. Adrian attempted streaming once under a private account. His skill returned quickly, but he disliked strangers giving me commands. I explained that teamwork required communication. He said customers should communicate more respectfully. I reminded him that not everyone addressed a game like a board meeting. Our viewers enjoyed his seriousness. They created affectionate names for him and asked when the older brother would return. I never revealed his identity. One evening, Theo joined our game. Adrian and Theo competed for every victory and blamed each other for every mistake. I carried the team while listening to them argue. Afterward, Theo messaged that my boyfriend behaved like an old man. Adrian asked why Theo had sent another message. I refused to show him. He followed me through the apartment until I surrendered the phone. By then, Theo had replaced the message with praise for Adrian. I knew Sebastian had intervened. The domestic comedy around us created a feeling I had never known. I began buying objects for the future instead of only what survival required. A larger table, an extra blanket, better dishes, and a plant that Adrian nearly killed by watering too often. I told him that care could also drown things. He looked at the dying plant and said the statement sounded like a lesson aimed at him. I said wisdom appeared in unexpected places. We replaced the plant and watered it according to instructions. When my leg fully healed, I began exercising again. Adrian created a schedule that resembled military training. I completed half and declared victory. He adjusted the plan without criticism. Sonny joined by lying in the center of the mat. Every stretch required moving around him. Adrian said the dog lacked discipline. Sonny placed one paw on his shoe. I told Adrian that he had been overruled. At meals, he continued filling my bowl. I gained a small amount of weight and complained that my waist had changed. Adrian said he considered the result proof of successful care. I lifted my shirt before the mirror and asked whether the muscles remained visible. He closed the bedroom door and said he required a closer inspection. I reminded him of his rule against casual undressing. He said the rule concerned other people. The conversation ended with laughter and a kiss. These were the days that made later loss unbearable. They were also the days that made reunion possible. We had built more than desire. We had built habits, language, food, trust, and a shared understanding of safety. Julian noticed and asked whether I enjoyed the meal. When I said yes, he ordered another dish for me and told Adrian that I was charming. The executives around us looked as if they had witnessed snow falling in summer. Julian Stone rarely praised anyone. The negotiation ended with Julian granting Adrian a larger share of the project than expected. Adrian claimed it was because the plan was strong. Liam privately suggested that Julian simply liked me. Adrian did not enjoy that explanation. At the hotel, Adrian found me messaging Theo about Hot Pot and wrapped his arms around me from behind. I continued typing until the silence around him became dangerous. Only then did I realize he was jealous again. I kissed him and promised that Theo was family to me. Adrian accepted the kiss but requested another one as additional evidence. Soon after, I met Theo in person. Sebastian appeared during our meal and immediately understood that Theo had ignored his dietary restrictions. Theo hid under a table while I greeted Sebastian politely. Sebastian was stern, but he packed food for me and thanked me for being a good influence on his nephew. Theo had imagined our first meeting for years. He arrived wearing clothes chosen with too much care and brought a bag of gifts for Sonny. I recognized him from his energy before he spoke. He examined me from every angle and complained that I had allowed viewers to imagine a heavy middle-aged man behind the voice. I said mystery increased business. He said hiding my face had deprived the internet of beauty. We chose a hot pot restaurant. Theo ordered the hottest broth despite his weak stomach. I warned him. He claimed youth protected him. 1 hour later, youth had abandoned him beneath the dining table. Sebastian entered with a calm expression that terrified Theo more than shouting. I greeted him and moved the spicy dishes away. The housekeeper praised me as a wise guide for Theo. I wanted to deny the title, but Sebastian thanked me before I could. At the Grant home, I noticed photographs of Sebastian when he was young. One showed him beside a blurred figure with light hair. The shape of that face seemed familiar. Theo said the person had been an old friend his uncle never discussed. Sebastian entered and closed the photograph album. His fingers rested on the cover longer than necessary. I understood that the powerful carried private wounds like everyone else. Theo and I had known each other through voices and messages for years, yet our first meeting felt effortless. He was exactly as lively as I expected. He brought enough gifts to fill my living room and spent 10 minutes praising Sonny. Our hot pot was much too spicy for his weak stomach. When Sebastian entered, Theo slid beneath the table with astonishing speed. The housekeeper introduced me as the friend who had guided Theo toward better choices. I wanted the floor to open beneath me. Sebastian asked what his nephew was doing under the table. Theo emerged slowly and confessed. Sebastian did not embarrass him in front of me. He simply ordered milder food and reminded Theo that affection did not protect him from stomach pain. I envied their relationship even while Theo complained about strict parenting. I told Theo that being cared for was a gift. He became quiet and promised to take better care of himself. At the university, Trevor Shaw insulted Theo and claimed to be Sebastian's secret son. I defended my friend so fiercely that Trevor could not answer. Sebastian later had Trevor removed from his property when he appeared at the gate with a false test. Trevor had narrow eyes, a loud voice, and the confidence of someone who had never been corrected. He called Theo an unwanted child and declared that Sebastian was his real father. I stepped between them and asked whether his own father had vanished, since he was collecting fathers from other families. Theo laughed so hard that he had to hold my shoulder. Trevor demanded an apology. We walked around him as if he were a broken trash bin blocking the path. That evening, Trevor appeared outside the Grant residence with a false family report and shouted for Sebastian. Security carried him away before Sebastian finished his tea. The truth was more embarrassing. Trevor's father, Ian Shaw, had lied about an old affair because he wanted access to the Grant fortune. Trevor blamed Theo for the humiliation. At his 18th birthday, he slipped a drug into Theo's glass and arranged for several men to wait in another room. I noticed the powder, switched the glasses, and pulled Theo away. Trevor's own plan collapsed around him. Sebastian rescued us and turned every piece of evidence over to the police. The scandal exposed the Shaw family's illegal factories and financial crimes. Their fortune disappeared with remarkable speed. I felt no joy at their suffering, but I felt great relief that Theo was safe. Adrian and I grew closer. We chose each other without pretending it was only gratitude. He was careful with me and never treated my body or trust as something he could demand. For the first time in either life, intimacy felt safe. Yet the original story continued trying to pull me back. Noah Dawson found me at the university and called me his lost younger brother. He looked healthy, which filled me with dread. In the first story, I had died so he could receive a heart. If his own heart was healthy now, then someone else might already have died for him. The meeting happened outside a lecture hall. Theo and I were discussing lunch when Noah blocked the path. His clothes were elegant, his smile gentle, and his expression perfectly designed to attract sympathy. He used my original family nickname. The sound made my stomach turn. Noah said our parents had searched for years. He held out photographs taken before the fire and pointed to the different colors of my eyes. He claimed that everyone wanted only to bring me home. Students began watching. To them, the scene looked like a beautiful reunion. They did not see the locked doors inside my memory. I asked why a loving family had waited so long to involve the authorities. Noah said the matter was private. I asked why his family had stored medical compatibility reports under my name. His smile trembled. Theo stepped beside me and told Noah to leave. Noah looked at him with quiet contempt and said outsiders should not interfere with family. I replied that family was defined by protection, not blood or paperwork. By that definition, Theo was closer to me than anyone named Dawson. Noah left after warning that the public would learn the truth. The next morning, Adrian Dawson released a statement. He presented photographs, records from the orphanage, and a story about a beloved child lost during a tragic fire. He removed every detail showing that I had run away. Online viewers found my old streaming account. Some celebrated the return of a wealthy heir. Others accused me of hiding to punish grieving parents. No one asked what kind of home made a child choose poverty over return. I turned off the phone. Adrian took it from my hand and blocked every number connected to the Dawsons. Liam investigated Noah's medical history. A heart transplant had occurred after my escape, but the donor record was hidden. The dates did not match any public waiting list. Someone else had supplied what the Dawson family once planned to take from me. Guilt touched me even though the death was not my fault. Adrian reminded me that survival did not make me responsible for the crimes of others. The Dawson family released childhood photographs and announced that they had found their missing son with mismatched eyes. Online strangers celebrated a reunion I did not want. They knew nothing about the basement, the chains, or the operating room. Adrian held me while I shook. I told him that Adrian Dawson, the head of the family, wanted to use me as a replacement for Noah. Adrian promised no one would touch me again. I decided to face Noah in the old basement. He wore an innocent smile and accused me of nearly killing him in the fire years before. I leaned close and asked whose heart was beating inside his chest. His face turned white. The basement had not changed. The walls smelled of damp stone, and a rusted ring remained where a chain had once held me. For one terrible moment, I was the powerless child from my first life again. Then I remembered Adrian waiting outside, Sonny beside the door, and my own hand holding the key. I had accepted Noah's private invitation because fear grew stronger in darkness. Adrian wanted to enter with me. I asked him to wait beyond the door. Facing the room alone mattered. Noah stood near the old table. He no longer pretended affection. He said the fire had almost killed him and blamed me for destroying the life his family planned. In his mind, my resistance was the original crime. He showed me a lighter and suggested that accidents repeated themselves. I moved close enough to take it before he understood my intention. Then I locked both of us inside. Noah stared at the lighter in my hand and finally saw that I was not the frightened child from his memories. I said that if he wanted fire, he could share the result. I had already died once and survived the day in memory. He had built his entire identity around other people sacrificing for him. Which of us truly feared death more? His courage disappeared. He struck the door, called for help, and promised money. I stood still. When the guard opened the room, Noah ran without looking back. Adrian entered and saw the old chain. Rage filled his face. I stopped him from following. Noah would face consequences later. That moment belonged to me, I touched the rusted ring and said goodbye to the child who had waited there for rescue. Then I walked out by choice. Noah said the family had raised me and that I owed them gratitude. I asked whether food and a locked room gave anyone the right to take a life. He insisted that his survival mattered more because he was loved. That sentence freed me from the last illusion I carried. Noah had never misunderstood what happened. He knew exactly what the family planned to do, and he believed my death was reasonable. I asked again about the heart inside his chest. He stepped backward. The healthy color in his face suddenly looked like evidence instead of good fortune. Noah tried to trap me and start another fire. I took the lighter from him and locked the door. I told him that if he wanted us to die together, I was no longer afraid. My calm frightened him more than rage could have done. He ran, and I walked out carrying the freedom I had denied myself for years. Trouble also followed Theo. Trevor drugged a drink at Theo's 18th birthday and planned to have hired men assault him. I switched the glasses and pulled Theo out of the building. Sebastian arrived in time to defeat the men pursuing us. Trevor suffered the consequences of his own scheme and was arrested. The Shaw family collapsed after its illegal business and old crimes were exposed. After that incident, I took Sonny and Theos cat Machi to a pet park. Sonny found a child near the water and began barking. In the lake, a woman was sinking with a weight chained to her ankle. Sebastian jumped into the water before I could remove my shoes and dragged her to shore. The park had been Theos' idea. He believed Sonny and Machi needed to improve their friendship. Machi considered himself the leader of every group and struck Sonny gently whenever the dog became too excited. Sonny accepted the authority of the smaller animal with surprising patience. We heard barking near the lake. At first I thought a child had fallen into the water. Then I saw an adult hand disappear beneath the surface and a chain attached to something heavy. Sebastian removed his coat while running. He entered the cold water, reached the woman, and lifted her head above the surface. Theo and I helped pull both of them onto the shore. The woman coughed, opened her eyes, and looked at Sebastian with shock. Before the police arrived, she disappeared into the crowd. Only a torn piece of cloth remained. Sebastian recognized the pattern from an old case connected to Samuel Lewis. The woman had probably carried evidence about the infant stolen years before. Someone wanted the evidence to disappear with her. When I returned home with wet sleeves, Adrian noticed immediately. He guided me toward the bathroom and began removing my coat. I told him I could bathe without supervision. He said he only wanted to prevent illness. The expression in his eyes suggested additional intentions. I pushed him outside and locked the door. When I emerged, he waited on the bed with a hairdryer. Warm air moved through my hair while he questioned every detail of the rescue. His worry became tenderness, and tenderness became a kiss. I reminded him that I had survived worse than a wet sleeve. He said survival did not forbid careful love. The woman disappeared before the police arrived. Later evidence connected her to the people investigating the Shaw family. She had learned too much about the stolen infant and the crimes committed years before. Another pet park visit brought a different danger. A man secretly recorded his aggressive dog attacking strangers, then edited the footage to make the victims appear responsible. He ordered the dog toward me, and its claws opened a long wound on my arm. The owner had built a channel around staged attacks. He provoked his dog, frightened other animals, and edited every response. Viewers believed he was exposing dangerous pets. In reality, he created the danger. I recognized the voice before I recognized the face. Months earlier, his edited footage had accused Sonny of attacking without cause. The original park camera proved Sonny had protected a child. The owner deleted his account before legal action reached him. Now he returned with a hidden camera attached to his coat. The large dog moved according to a hand signal. It struck my waist and knocked me sideways. When I raised an arm, claws opened the skin. Theo shouted and moved between us. Sonny launched forward, but I ordered him to stop because I knew the camera would capture only the final reaction. Machi ignored the order, jumped onto a bench, and struck the aggressive dog across the nose from above. The unexpected attack confused the animal. Sonny used the moment to stand over me without biting. His body became a shield. Theo seized the owner's coat. I found the camera and removed the memory card. The owner claimed his dog had acted alone. The recording showed the signal clearly. He abandoned the injured animal and attempted to run. Park security stopped him at the gate. We brought the dog to a clinic. Beneath the aggression was fear, hunger, and repeated abuse. The animal did not need punishment. It needed distance from the person who trained it to hurt. The original footage spread online before the edited version could appear. Viewers who once insulted Sonny apologized. The police charged the owner with deliberate endangerment and animal abuse. Adrian arrived at the clinic first, followed by Julian and Sebastian. 3 powerful men entered the hallway with expressions dark enough to frighten the staff. I lifted my bandaged arm and said the injury was shallow. They responded by questioning every security procedure in the park. Kyle cleaned the wound and administered preventive treatment. He told my fathers that their presence raised the temperature of the clinic. Victor stood near the door holding medical supplies and wisely remained silent. That evening I fed Sonny beef and praised his restraint. He had protected me without giving the attacker the violent image he wanted. Machi received fish and behaved as if the victory belonged entirely to him. The rescued dog later escaped from a temporary shelter with several companions. They appeared together at a larger rescue center and waited by the entrance until workers found them. The story became famous. Donations paid for their care, and each animal eventually found a safer home. Theo kicked the animal away while Sonny and Machi protected me. I took the hidden camera from the owner and recognized his voice. He had previously used edited videos to accuse local dogs of violence and collect attention online. We brought the injured animal to a rescue clinic instead of blaming it for the owner's cruelty. The original footage exposed the scheme. Police arrested the man before he could publish another lie, and the dog later found a safer home. Julian, Sebastian, and Adrian arrived at the clinic at the same time. Their expressions made the entire hallway empty. I spent more energy calming 3 furious men than I did receiving treatment. Behind their downfall was a much older secret. Samuel Lewis and Ian Shaw had once stolen a newborn child out of jealousy. They believed the child's existence would bind Julian Stone and Sebastian Grant together forever. The infant vanished on a winter night, while lies separated Julian and Sebastian for nearly 20 years. Samuel attempted one final act of revenge. He hired a driver to stage an accident on a snowy street. I saw an older man standing in the road and ran forward to pull him away from the approaching vehicle. The crash threw me into darkness. I woke in a hospital and learned that the person I had saved was Samuel himself. His hired driver had lost control and struck the wrong target. Even after everything he had done, my first instinct had been to save a human life. Trevor visited Samuel in secret because he believed the old man still possessed hidden money. He attempted to remove the medical support keeping Samuel alive. Police stopped him, and another layer of the family crimes became public. Ian Shaw wandered through the hospital and confessed in panic when he saw me. He said Samuel had stolen a child many years earlier. The infant had been placed inside a bag and abandoned during winter. Ian had spent his life burying the truth, while Trevor had enjoyed comfort built on another child's suffering. Their family finally collapsed beneath the weight of its own choices. I did not celebrate. I returned home, kissed Adrian, fed Sonny, and chose peace. I did not yet understand that the stolen child was me. As winter approached, my 19th birthday drew near. In my first life, I had died on the 8th of December. Every day that brought me closer to that date filled me with quiet panic. Felix Foster, Adrian's half-brother, kidnapped me to force Adrian into a trap. Felix locked me inside an abandoned warehouse and set explosives around it. I cut through my restraints, crawled through a narrow drain, and escaped moments before the building exploded. Felix struck me before locking the door, then mocked the love I trusted. He said Adrian had not arrived because I had never mattered. In my first life, words like those would have destroyed my will to fight. In this life, I knew that my value did not depend on whether another person reached me in time. I used a broken metal edge to cut the rope around my wrists. Smoke entered the room before I reached the old drainage channel. The opening was narrow, filthy, and completely dark. I released Sonny earlier, so I trusted that he would find help while I saved myself. I crawled until my elbows bled. When I lifted the drain cover outside, the warehouse exploded behind me. The heat pushed me onto the road. A delivery driver found me, gave me water, and helped me return to the city. Every kilometer home hurt, but I imagined Adrian opening the door. I imagined his hands checking every wound. I imagined him promising that Felix would never reach me again. Bleeding and exhausted, I returned home, believing Adrian would hold me and tell me I was safe. Instead, he asked who I was. The shock that restored his old memories had erased everything that happened after I rescued him. Noah stood at his side wearing contact lenses that copied my unusual eyes. He claimed he was the person Adrian had always searched for. I took Sonny and disappeared. Theo could not reach me. Sebastian learned from an old test that I was connected to his family and began searching. Julian also searched without knowing how close I had been. Adrian remained in the silent apartment, surrounded by objects that proved someone had loved him, but unable to remember the face belonging to that love. Theo went to the apartment and demanded answers. Adrian could not explain the clothes in his closet that were too small for him, the dog bowls beside the kitchen, or the photographs turned face down on a shelf. Noah tried to remove every trace of me, but Liam stopped him. At the Grant residence, an old family report surfaced. Sebastian read the result and learned that the young streamer Theo called his closest friend was connected to him by blood. The joy lasted only seconds before Theo announced that I was missing. They searched the burned warehouse and found no body. Theo cried because he believed I had died. Sebastian refused to accept it and used every resource he possessed. Julian heard fragments of the search but did not yet know they were searching for the young neighbor sleeping behind his wall. Adrian began suffering dreams about rain, a yellow coat, bright pajamas, and a pair of eyes with different colors. Noah claimed those memories belonged to him. Yet whenever Noah approached, Adrian felt only distance. Whenever he entered the empty kitchen, his chest ached. Liam showed him records from District X. Adrian saw the streaming account, the investments, the clinic visits, and the lease bearing my name. Facts told him that I existed. His heart told him that losing me had destroyed something irreplaceable. Sonny and I traveled to a distant coastal town. I rented a quiet villa under another name and filled the kitchen with enough food to survive the date of my old death. On the night of the 8th of December, a storm shook the windows. My heart began to fail, my body went cold, and I collapsed. Sonny ran through the rain and barked at the lighted house next door. Julian Stone found me and rushed me to the hospital. When I woke, the doctor said my condition had been dangerous. Then he added that they would need several more weeks to confirm the health of the baby. I stared at him. I was pregnant. In this world, a very small number of men could carry children, and I belonged to that rare group. Kyle had warned me before. I simply never believed the strange rule of this world would become part of my life. Julian stood beside the bed and asked who the father was. I lied and said I did not know. When he asked whether the baby belonged to Adrian, I denied it, though my heart answered for me. Then I saw the date. It was the 9th of December. I had survived. The realization changed the air inside my lungs. I was still frightened, still alone, and carrying a future I had never planned. Yet the old deadline had passed. Nothing in the original story described what happened next, which meant every next step belonged to me. I placed a hand over my abdomen. The child was still too small for me to feel, but I promised that no one would ever treat this life as a tool. My baby would grow up knowing love without debt, protection without chains, and family without fear. I laughed until tears covered my face. The old story no longer owned me. I had crossed the day of my execution and entered a future that had never been written. I told Julian that I would keep the baby. I had believed I was an orphan all my life, and this child would be my family. Julian did not argue. He drove me home, and we discovered that his villa stood directly beside mine. During the following months, I often visited Julian for meals. He complained whenever I moved too quickly, made food when morning sickness kept me awake, and prepared a room for me when the pregnancy became difficult. His concern felt less like kindness from a neighbor and more like the care of a father. By the 5th month, I could no longer hide the curve of my stomach. Julian ordered me to move into his villa and placed me in the largest room on the ground floor. He hired specialists, changed the kitchen menu, and researched every possible complication. A man feared across the business world began calling doctors at midnight because I had sneezed twice. Morning sickness became evening sickness, then all-day sickness. Julian made noodles when I woke hungry and sat beside me when I could not eat. Sonny slept against my bedroom door and followed me whenever I walked. Between them, I was never alone. The baby moved for the first time while Julian was reading a report. I took his hand and placed it against my stomach. The tiny kick made his eyes fill with tears. Neither of us understood why the moment felt like a reunion. At the hospital, nurses whispered that Julian and I looked alike, especially our unusual eyes. A forgotten memory surfaced. In my first life, I had once pulled a despairing man away from an oncoming car during a snowstorm. That man had been Julian. When I saw a childhood photograph in his phone, I recognized myself. Neither of us dared to believe it yet. My son was born in September after a difficult night. The moment the pain faded enough for me to think, I looked at his tiny wrinkled face and asked Julian why my child was so ugly. Julian laughed through tears and promised that every newborn looked like that. Julian had prepared an entire private medical team, yet he paced outside the operating room like any frightened parent. After 2 long hours, the doctor announced that both of us were safe. Julian entered with his hands trembling. The first time he held Teddy, his body became rigid. He was afraid even to breathe. I told him that the baby would not break, but Julian refused to move until a nurse corrected the position of his arms. 2 days later, Teddy already looked softer and brighter. I examined every feature and declared that he had improved greatly. Julian said his grandson had always been the most beautiful child in the world. It was the happiest disagreement we ever had. I named the baby Teddy. Julian held him with the stiff caution of a man carrying the most precious treasure in the world. Sonny guarded the crib, and Lily Hart, the kindest of the nurses Julian hired, helped me recover. Teddy quickly became round-cheeked, bright-eyed, and beautiful. Lily was the first person brave enough to say that Teddy looked like Julian. She asked whether Julian and I had ever taken a family test. We dismissed the idea at first, but Julian eventually agreed. The first result confirmed a biological relationship. I insisted it was a mistake. A second test at the Central Hospital returned the same answer. Julian Stone was my father. He stood with the paper trembling in his hands. He wanted to hold me but feared that I would reject him. I walked home in a daze and cried until I could no longer stand. I was not an unwanted orphan. I had a father who had searched for me and would have loved me if cruel people had not stolen me away. Julian carried me back to his house when I became ill from grief. He stayed beside my hospital bed through the night and investigated every year of suffering I had endured. The Dawsons soon lost their company, their influence, and the protection that had hidden their crimes. Julian told me that I had been born on the 9th of December during a heavy snowfall. The day after my death in the first life was my true birthday in this one. It felt like the universe had returned my stolen life to me. For my first real birthday with him, Julian filled an entire room with gifts. There were clothes, books, computers, keys, and property papers. I asked for only one new computer. He told me to choose 20 things because he owed me 19 birthdays and one future. I did not need the objects, but I understood what they meant to him. Each gift was an apology to the child he had been unable to raise. I hugged him and said that having a father was enough. That night, Julian dreamed of my first life. He saw the birthday fire, the basement, and the face I had before the Dawsons scarred it. He woke with tears and touched my cheek as if making sure I was alive. He promised to protect me from then on. I told him that protection was welcome, but I was no longer helpless. When I finally called Julian father, he cried openly. The identity of my other father was an even greater surprise. Julian had once loved Sebastian Grant. Deception by the Shaw family separated them before my birth. Sebastian had never known that Julian was carrying their child, and Julian had believed Sebastian abandoned him. Sebastian was my father, and Theo was my cousin. Julian explained that he and Sebastian had been young when the Shaw family separated them. Messages were hidden, meetings were sabotaged, and each man was told that the other had chosen someone else. Julian left while carrying me and tried to build a life alone. Samuel learned about the pregnancy and arranged my disappearance. Sebastian received the truth like a man struck by lightning. He had spent years caring for Theo because family was the only love he knew how to express, never realizing his own son was alive. When he came to see me, he stopped several steps away and asked permission before touching me. I could not call him father immediately. He accepted that. Like Adrian later, he proved himself through patience. He brought meals, helped Julian care for Teddy, and told me stories about the life he had imagined for a child he never knew existed. Theo adjusted more quickly. He announced that becoming my cousin changed nothing, except that he now had a permanent right to enter my house without knocking. Sebastian corrected that belief at once. Theo needed half an hour to accept that Teddy was his nephew. Then he refused to put the baby down. The remaining truths destroyed our enemies. Noah's healthy heart had belonged to the daughter of a driver whom Dawson had paid to remain silent. The grieving father eventually exposed the crime. Damien and Noah lost everything, and the people who had treated lives as objects were finally forced to answer for their actions. Julian, Sebastian, Theo, Teddy, Sonny, and I returned to Capital City. News of the lost son of two powerful families spread quickly. After a year of searching, Adrian saw the reports. Hope returned to a man who had almost forgotten how to live. I avoided him for as long as I could. Then one afternoon, while I walked through a park with Teddy, I met him face to face. Adrian looked thinner than I remembered. The cold authority remained, but exhaustion lived beneath it. He stopped in the path as though any movement might frighten me away. I tightened my arms around Teddy. My son had never seen Adrian, yet he leaned forward with immediate curiosity. Adrian wore the same expression he once wore when Sonny first accepted food from his hand, a mixture of hope and disbelief. Teddy looked at Adrian and called him father. I froze. Adrian stared at the child, then at me. He asked who the father was. Panic made me say that the baby belonged to a man named Ash. Adrian's eyes darkened with jealousy. He took Teddy into his arms with clumsy tenderness, and the child immediately reached back toward me. Adrian apologized for forgetting me. His voice carried more pain than anger. He escorted us home and greeted Julian with perfect manners. Sebastian looked ready to throw him back into the street. Julian remained calm because dreams of another life had shown him that Adrian had always been the man beside me at the end. That night, Adrian ordered Liam to find every man named Ash in my life. Several hours later, he finally realized that Ash was the name I had given him when he lost his memory. He had become jealous of himself. Before sunrise, he was waiting outside my door. Lily let him in after a security guard mistook him for a dangerous stalker. Adrian asked whether Teddy was his son. I refused to answer. He knelt before me with red eyes and said that he had searched for me every day. Then he told me something I had never known. In my first life, the person who entered the burning Dawson estate and tried to save me had been Adrian. He had failed once, then arrived too late again in this life. Even before he lost his memory, the person he had been searching for was me. I told him about escaping from the warehouse and returning home, only to be forgotten. Adrian accepted every accusation. He did not defend himself. He simply asked for a chance to spend the rest of his life repairing what one terrible moment had broken. Teddy reached out and slapped him twice with his tiny hands. The sight made me laugh through my tears. I warned Adrian that I had found both of my fathers, and neither would forgive him if he hurt me. He smiled for the first time in a year. I introduced him to Teddy as his other father. Teddy called him father again, and Adrian looked as if someone had placed the entire world in his arms. Forgiveness did not happen in one day. Adrian returned every morning, cared for Teddy, walked Sonny, listened when I spoke, and left whenever I asked for space. He never used power or money to pressure me. He allowed trust to grow again through ordinary acts. He learned how to warm bottles, change clothes, and hold Teddy without looking as if he were attending a board meeting. The first time Teddy fell asleep on his chest, Adrian remained seated for 2 hours because he feared waking him. Sonny tested him more severely. Adrian had to prepare meals, throw the same toy countless times, and surrender his place beside me on the sofa. Only after several weeks did Sonny place his head on Adrian's knee. Adrian treated the moment as a formal pardon. Julian observed everything without comment. Sebastian gave comments freely. He reminded Adrian that wealth, apologies, and old feelings did not entitle him to my return. Adrian agreed. He said that if I never forgave him, he would still protect my right to live peacefully. That answer mattered more than any promise of eternal love. When I finally agreed to a date, he arrived before sunrise. We returned to our old apartment, where every object remained exactly as I had left it. Adrian wrapped his arms around me and kissed me with a year of longing. I realized that I had never stopped loving him. I had only been afraid that love would make me powerless again. This time I understood the difference. The Dawson family had demanded obedience and called it love. Adrian gave me choices, even when my choices hurt him. That was why I could choose him freely. Julian and Sebastian eventually approved our marriage, though Sebastian made Adrian endure a long private conversation first. We bought a home beside my father's so Teddy could run between the houses. Our wedding was planned for the following summer. Adrian would have registered the marriage the same day if the law and our fathers allowed it. Julian chose an auspicious date and pretended not to feel sad about his son leaving home. Sebastian reviewed the legal documents so carefully that Adrian joked he was acquiring a company rather than a husband. Our new house connected to my father's garden through a small gate. Teddy used it constantly. Sonny learned that every kitchen offered different treats. Theo appeared on weekends, usually with mochi and an unreasonable amount of baby clothing. Before the ceremony, I entered university through my own examination results. People online accused my fathers of buying my place, but the school released the examination records. I ignored the remaining insults. Years later, a material research project I led was adopted for important public work, and no one questioned my ability again. I also returned to streaming, though I no longer needed the income. My old viewers celebrated when they heard my voice. Adrian accidentally spoke during a broadcast, and everyone recognized the mysterious man from District X. I told them he was not my boyfriend. Then I added that he was my husband. The chat exploded. Some viewers complained that the cold-voiced stranger had stolen me. Most wished us happiness. When someone insulted Teddy, Adrian quietly sent a message to Liam. The account returned 3 minutes later with a desperate apology. Theo remained one of my most loyal viewers, though he complained that 3 new accounts had pushed him down the donation list. Those accounts belonged to Adrian, Julian, and Sebastian. The 4th belonged to Kyle, who denied it whenever anyone asked. Our wedding took place on a quiet beach at sunset. Only family and our closest friends attended. Kyle brought Victor, whose long effort to repair their relationship had finally earned him another chance. Theo carried Teddy until the ceremony began. Sonny wore a small blue ribbon, and Theos Cat Machi behaved as if the entire event had been organized for him. The ceremony was intentionally small. I had spent too much of my life being displayed as an object for powerful families. I wanted no reporters and no grand performance. I wanted the people who had protected me, the sound of the sea, and Adrian waiting at the end of the aisle. Kyle checked my pulse before the ceremony because he claimed I looked nervous. Victor offered him water without being asked, a simple gesture that showed how much he had changed. Theo practiced walking with Teddy and cried before anyone else did. Julian adjusted my clothes 3 times. Sebastian told him they were already perfect, then adjusted them once more when Julian looked away. Teddy walked unsteadily down the aisle with our rings. Julian cried, and Sebastian held his shoulder. Kyle carried Teddy away after the vows so Adrian and I could stand alone for one precious moment. Adrian kissed me as the sea wind moved around us. I held his hand and watched the sky turn red above the water. In my first life, I had died believing I was only a collection of useful organs. In this life I had become a son, a father, a husband, a friend, and the owner of my own future. 3 years later, Teddy started preschool. 5 adults stood at the gate and watched him enter the classroom. Theo cried and suggested delaying school for another year. Adrian looked calm, but his hand never left mine. I remained at the gate long after Teddy disappeared inside. The night before school, none of the adults slept properly. Teddy packed his tiny bag with complete confidence while the rest of us checked the same supplies repeatedly. In the morning he finished breakfast, put on his bag, and waited by the door as if he had attended school for years. At the entrance, Theo asked whether 3 was too young. Julian asked whether the teachers had completed every safety inspection. Sebastian reminded everyone that millions of children survived preschool. Adrian said nothing, but he had already memorized the route to the nearest hospital. Teddy sat among a chorus of crying children without making a sound. He remembered my promise of ice cream after school. He politely asked permission to use the bathroom, ate every vegetable at lunch, and helped the teacher comfort other children. When his expression became serious, his classmates moved away because he looked exactly like Adrian. During the afternoon nap, he hid beneath his blanket and cried because he missed me. At lunch he held his spoon correctly, ate every piece of green vegetable, and received a bright paper flower from the teacher. Several children were still crying, so Teddy helped wipe their faces and offered them food. His gentle behavior resembled mine. His serious expression resembled Adrian so completely that the other children obeyed him without understanding why. Only when the room became quiet for the afternoon nap did his courage weaken. He pulled the blanket over his head and whispered that he missed his father's. The teacher sat nearby until he slept. I arrived at the school an hour early. The moment Teddy saw me, he ran into my arms and wrapped both hands around my neck. "I missed you, Father," he said. That night he appeared at our bedroom door holding a small pillow. Adrian tried to explain that he was old enough to sleep alone. Teddy ignored him and looked directly at me with shining eyes. He already understood who held the highest authority in our home. I moved Adrian aside and lifted Teddy onto the bed. He had been brave all day, so he deserved to sleep with us. Teddy settled between his fathers, wished us good night, and closed his eyes. I had once begged fate for nothing more than survival. Fate gave me another life, and I filled it with people who chose me. From then on, every ordinary morning was the happy ending I had fought to earn.